You're listening to The Switch. The Switch is a podcast about ideas and experiences that change our minds. I'm your host, Chase Harris, and joined, as always, by my co-host, Alex Berner. In this episode, we do things a little bit differently. This is not an interview, but a discussion. We bring on a guest, one of my friends, Nate Francisco, and the three of us together are sort of experts in this topic in our own right. And I'm being purposely vague about the topic because this is a topic where some people are just inherently not interested. And if you're that kind of person, if you hear the beginning of the discussion and go, yeah, I don't really care that much, I'm going to turn it off. Well, hold on a second. Give us a chance to convince you. You know, you're here for ideas. You take ideas seriously. So do we. And I think by the end of this discussion, you'll understand why we give this topic so much importance, and you'll understand our perspective a little more. So if you are the kind of person who likes this topic right off the bat, there's something in there for you too. But sit tight, and I hope you enjoy.
And if you like what we do here on The Switch, the best way to support us is through Patreon. You can find us at www.patreon.com/switch_podcast. You can also check us out on social media. On Instagram and Twitter, we are at switch_podcast. And on Facebook, we are The Switch Podcast.
So, without further delay, we start with our own stories about how we noticed the change in perspective around this topic.
I started off playing video games when I was really little. My parents actually let me play computer games. I don't know, it's probably 4 years old, maybe. I remember there's pictures of me sitting on my dad's lap, like playing a game on the computer. It was some type of learning game, you know, or something like Busy Town, how things work in Busy Town. But yeah, I had really early exposure, and it was odd because my parents never let me play console games, but I could play any game on the computer. So I don't know why they thought there was this distinction there. But anyway, I was always super bored growing up. I was an only child, and video games are what I always looked forward to. So for me, they were just a huge amount of what my time was spent on. I would sit in class, and this is probably starting at like 8 years old, maybe, and just stare at the clock and wait, because I knew when the school day was over, I was going to be able to go play video games and escape to a different world where I wasn't so bored. And that's kind of, I feel like, what got me through being a teenager, was having this non-social place where I could retreat to. I never played games online. I never played with friends unless it was like co-op at my house when we were hanging out. And I think that helped me get back to a centered place. You know, I don't know if it was the only thing that could have done that, but I always found it valuable, and I think it helped me keep my creativity up too, because it was, you know, I was going to other worlds, learning about new places, you know, learning European geography, learning math skills, learning strategy, all these different things that I find now when I look back to be very useful. So I think in all, I don't have too much time to play nowadays, but my takeaway from games has always been a relaxing place that I can go when I need a break from all the social or life pressures, basically.
Welcome to The Switch, and it's your turn to tell the story.
Thanks for having me. Kind of unrelated to what made me think differently about video games is, Alex, I heard you mention on another episode that you were an only child, and I have to say that there are some things that you missed out on, as you referenced, but there are some things that shouldn't be missed. You see kids and you don't know why their parents are telling them to fight or not to fight, and why don't those parents figure out what's going on between them? It doesn't matter. Those kids are geared to dislike each other right now at this point in their life, and I just need them to stop fighting for a little while. But one of my earliest memories actually is of playing Street Fighter on the Super Nintendo with my older brother. And he is 6 years older than me. I was born in 91, so the Super Nintendo was big then. And when I say play, I mean I'm sure that I never beat him ever in a round. But so there was a social aspect between me and my siblings, and it kind of speaks to the versatility of video games. It helped you when you might not have had a person your age to interact with, and for me, it was how my siblings and I might have interacted. But so I never really cared about how useful video games were to the rest of your life. I used it as a form of entertainment, but I actually just in the last year started thinking about video games differently. And I was just doing my thing, playing something. It was likely something competitive. We were either playing Overwatch or Escape from Tarkov, Rocket League, a number of things you could consider to be intense. And my girlfriend was in the room, and she basically, since the Super Nintendo, she had probably only played FIFA and Mario Kart. And after I was done, she looked at me and said, you're doing a lot of stuff right now. You're trying to watch where your teammates are, and you're trying to be accurate with the mouse, and somehow you're also answering text messages and talking to your other friends, and the whole time you guys are talking about something other than exactly what you're doing. And I never thought about it, but simply for me, it made me realize that I don't know if I have a high ability for multitasking, or if it was just developed through video games, but there are certainly things that I think about, and you don't really consider how much you're actually doing at one point in time, especially because it's an entertainment thing. But I think actively trying to apply that to your life, just the multitasking and focusing, and it really put it into perspective that, I kind of am doing a lot. And I think that's evident because if you are ever trying to show someone how to play a game that you're very good at, sometimes it's a little frustrating because they might not pick up on what you're doing right away. And to them, they're almost saying, like, how are you doing all of this so easily? And it really is through practice and exposure. But I just never thought of it that way. And again, I was completely uninterested in the efficacy of video game playing at that time.
Yeah, so I think that actually gets to sort of the core of why I wanted to bring you on to talk with us. And, all three of us are sort of experts in video games in different ways, even though, there's some intersection in our interests. We definitely have our own pockets of interest. But I think the switch that I want to establish for this episode is that sort of difference between thinking of video games as a waste of time or some way to kill boredom, and thinking of video games as some utility towards something useful or some utility towards something meaningful. And my story to start out is actually a story of me noticing that there was this difference. And this is the first time I really realized that my experience of video games is vastly different than most people's. So I'm not going to get into too much of how I started playing games in childhood. But, my first game, I don't even know what my first game was, but I got the Xbox when Halo came out in, I don't know, what was that, 2000 something? 2003? 2001? Yep. But anyway, fast forward to I'm in college, and I have a friend who she grew up in Egypt and was in the United States throughout her growth years, and ended up going to college in the U.S. And we had a couple of conversations about video games, but it was probably our third or fourth conversation about video games when I realized that we were sort of talking past each other. And so I just asked her, well, what is your conception of video games? What do you know exists? And she sort of looked at me funny and took a step back, metaphorically. And she said, well, my experience of video games is basically there are two kinds. There's the kind that's, you can go to your local, your local Walmart or whatever, and it's this box that's colorful and it's for kids and it's SpongeBob and it's plastic and it's got a joystick and you plug it into the back of the TV and you play SpongeBob. Or, yeah, it's either that or it's Call of Duty. It's, sweaty fat guys in their mom's basement who have these insane twitchy reaction times and just spend 12 hours a day trying to shoot each other and waste their lives away. And she didn't understand that, that's a hugely myopic view of what video games are. But I think that made me realize that, a lot of people, when I say, oh, I play video games or something like that comes up in conversation, that's their view. And that's a lot more people than I realized. So what I really want to do with this conversation and some of the topics we're going to hit is explore, in our experience as gamers, what are some of the things that people may not totally understand, or what are some of the utilities that video games have? And we'll get to some of the downsides as well, but that's where I want to start. Either of you guys want to jump in on that story?
I guess to your point, when you were talking about the almost, they did some very, retro type of games where you would plug RCA jacks into the back of your TV and it had an Atari-like joystick and you would play, like simple baseball games or, there are that at one point in time was definitely video games. And then another huge point in time socially for video games was at least the concept of people swearing at each other from their parents' basements about one of the biggest shooters that ever came out. And I almost think that those two things combined might even consolidate like the two main ideas of what people who I think maybe look down on at least a little bit the whole idea of video games. And that's where we do kind of get into, well, it's a waste of time, or, there some degeneracy comes to mind, like the things that people say. And I know like Moose and I have heard and seen some bad things.
You got to use my real name here.
That's right. Your name is not Moose. So Chase and I have actually known each other for about 5 years. We randomly met through an Arma clan, which is a military simulator.
So I actually want to tell that story a little bit.
All right.
So, yeah, what was it, 4 or 5 years ago? I don't know how you had found out about this game. I don't even remember how I had found out about this game. But to give a little perspective to somebody who may not be familiar with this topic, we were playing a game that was this very detailed sort of military simulation. It's called a sandbox, where you can sort of put together different pieces of military simulation, whether it's infantry combat, whether it's aircraft or vehicles or transportation. Like, if you can think of a sort of small to medium scale military scenario, Arma is the kind of game that will let you build that with some detail. And because of the nature of that game, these groups had popped up where people who were very interested in that kind of scenario for whatever reason, whether it's historical reenactment or understanding sort of the tactical, technical details of things, or whatever, for whatever reason, people flocked to this game and started grouping up. And in the video game world, when you find a group of people specifically to play a game, it's called a clan. I don't know where that comes from, but
Scotland.
We had found this group that the whole premise of the group was, we're here to focus on tactics. We're here to focus on small unit tactics and, translating some of the skills that people build in real life military scenarios to the video game world. And we'll maybe talk about some of the benefits of that. But that was the draw, at least for me, and I think a lot of the people. And the big benefit here that I think is fairly obvious from the way that we're interacting is a social one. And this is not a typical way that people socialize and make friends, but I think for people, not everybody there was somebody who had social issues, but there were certainly people there who did. But the cool thing that this helped us do is we had a social environment where people were encouraged to interact with each other and cooperate. You know, you have a team that's goal-oriented. We're cooperating towards a task. And there's a common interest. You know, even in downtime when people are just chatting, there's a common interest so that, you know, you can build these social connections. And that's Nate, that's how you and I met. And we've been playing games together for 4 or 5 years. We talk about all sorts of stuff. Like I consider you my friend. And I think that's a social connection that most people don't necessarily understand is available through a virtual environment.
I think it's common for, on top of that, they don't think that it really happens, but I think it's also easier to dismiss, you know? I once heard you, I don't know if you got it from somewhere, if you came up with yourself, but I was trying to get a hold of you to say, you know, are you around to play some game? And you said, no, I have Meat World things. And I just sat there for a second. Meat Space. And I was like, that sounds horrendous. What is that? And he said, well, you know, we're people, and, you know, we usually interact in a cyber sort of space, and I have to go grocery shopping or, you know, real things. Yeah. And I loved that term. And but now you live much closer than you did when I had first met you. We were actually all in New York, and it is kind of strange to you feel like people are so far away, and all of a sudden it's, you know, I'm in Massachusetts. I've been there. I'm in the city. I've been there too. And I've met a couple people who have actually interacted with those people. So I think socially, I have met people who I consider to be as close of friends as people who I spend time with in real life. You know, we're not going golfing or fishing, but you know, we are on these sort of, you know, Discord servers and et cetera, interacting and planning and working together. So, and I honestly think that for me is kind of applicable. You know, again, with my siblings, I would sit down and, you know, we're trying to figure out how to beat certain things. Four Sword on the GameCube, a Legend of Zelda game. My brother and I are sitting there trying to figure out what to do. How do we beat this? And it was kind of a puzzle, certainly, which is likely beneficial. But at the same time, it's communication, which is, as Chase so often reminds me, the most important thing when you're playing a lot of these games. And I think that communication, you know, it's brought up a lot. It's in real life. It's also very important to be able to communicate not only accurately but efficiently.
Yeah, and one of the things I've noticed from specifically our experience playing with the groups that we've played with is it's not just raw social communication. It's actually leadership skills. You and I were talking the other day. We've got a good friend who we love dearly and plays with us, but he, I think, has different motivations for playing video games and we all have different motivations, but in this particular instance with this particular game that we wanted to play, I think because of his motivations for playing, he was getting a little frustrated, and we just sort of went down the rabbit hole of the psychology of why people play games. And in our particular instance, it was actually to make sure that we could maintain this social relation and have everything be cohesive without alienating anybody. And for me, it sort of was a little bit of a stretch on my leadership skills to adapt to this other way of thinking. But there have been all along the way, probably even since before, getting on and playing that military sandbox game, Arma, where any sort of online play has been, with the type of games that I typically seek out, has been a test of my leadership skills. We go in and play games all the time where we need to form up. Somebody needs to be leading and delegating tasks, and each person has to understand the core goal of the mission. And all of these leadership skills that I've heard from other places sort of all come together, and it's a way to practice them. And I've noticed a sort of cyclical effect where, it's almost like my leadership skills get bootstrapped by, maybe not bootstrapped, but it is real practice because they translate into the real world. I can see skills that I have developed through sort of these social cooperative games translating to how I can cooperate with people in real life and understand like people being goal oriented or people, having different motivations for being in different places and interacting with me. So I think that translates.
And I think it helps, you talked about different motivations, but also the different personalities. Sometimes, especially when you're in groups that get large, in video games, there are some people who you might not, really meld with. It's hard for you to figure out who's doing what and who's in charge. And maybe they just simply annoy you. And, you kind of think like, man, that person is tough to deal with. And, maybe you're the one that's tough to deal with in my case sometimes. But I think that just exposure to that has helped me in my real life as well. At your job, there are sometimes people that are tough to deal with, or maybe they are motivated differently than you are, even though you're doing the same job or you're supposed to be working together. Or sometimes you look at things differently, and like, it's tough, especially when you do disagree on how to do something or why. It's hard to communicate that you think someone might be wrong, or that maybe you think your way is better. And I think working together with a team online, at least for me, has just been kind of like putting reps in, all kinds of different people. And the more types of people you interact with, I had more exposure to that in 3 years of playing video games, maybe while at college, than I did in my first year of my current job, just because of how many different people you work with. And depending on where you might work in real life, you only work with a small handful, and then you adjust to them and you can work with them. So I think that it's been beneficial for me socially, but really kind of talking to people who think just so fundamentally different about how things should be done.
I think that's all really interesting. And I think that brings up a question, at least that I have, that are interactions through video games any less valuable than real world interactions? For example, like you're talking about, you're actually working together with these people to accomplish a goal. Whereas in real life, you might not be working together at all. You might just be at a bar. So to me, that seems like those experiences could be more valuable than those in the real world, depending on the situation. So I just wanted to ask you guys if you think there's anything that interaction online through video games can't have that real world can.
It's tough, and it goes back to the whole premise of what are you actually doing? And physically, if you and I are working on building a shed and we're trying to figure out how best to do that, at the end we have built a shed, right? And when Chase and I are trying to figure out how to get through a level, at the end of the level we have more maybe things or experience or just they're not physical things. So do the things you're doing have value? Maybe not in that sense. So maybe, I guess, the building of physical things is not there with video games in general. Although maybe with VR and AR, we'll see something different in the future. But I think that, again, as and Chase brought it up already, but maybe practice, or like I said before, getting reps in. If I've been put in a situation where I had to do this and I had to do that, and I think the best way for us to learn, at least for myself, is to be able to relate things to other things that we've done. Maybe I've made this mistake before where I was too hasty in how I thought something should be done, and I kind of stepped out in front and made a decision, and we messed up. So, and if I've done that a couple times, hopefully I can learn from my mistakes and say, oh, okay, this is where I should not assert what I think is correct. Maybe I should step back or think about it for just a minute longer. And if I have practiced that in video games, and that experience, real or not, in its end product has helped me at my job, does that mean that the video games helped me? You know, so I've kind of almost talked myself back into saying, as a practice function, maybe there aren't things that you can't at least have an effect on. Maybe you can't build that shed through this call, but we can experience other things that might help us think about how best to build that shed later.
And I think if we're going along the lines of practicing skills, you don't really make too much in school, right? You know, it's practicing skills. You don't, come away with a shed, as you used as an example, but you do come away with more skills. So
yeah,
right. Like in math class, you could practice trigonometry forever, and you'll come away with a skill. But at the end of the day, you just sort of transferred, graphite from the tube in your hand to the dead tree on your table. But one of the things I wanted to touch on with your original question of, is there something in those interactions that, you can't get on one side? I think in form, yes. In value, I'm not so sure. I think in value, cyberspace interactions and meat space interactions can be different. I think in form, there are currently things that you can't get on one side that you can on the other. The obvious example is things like body language, being able to, touch, sense, smell, hear, see in a way that's sort of contextual to the actual space that you're in. I think that there's a lot of value to doing that in real life. On the other hand, I think in sort of video game-esque cyber interactions, because that stuff is missing, you do learn to pay attention to some of the other things. And again, like it's what we've been saying, as far as social interaction goes, it's skill building. And I think there is meaning there. I think there is meaning beyond just practice. Like when we accomplish an objective in a video game, like we've actually done something. We've built some social meaning into our interaction. We've gone someplace that we couldn't have before. That I think you can do something similar by going out and playing kickball in the park with your friends. At the end of the day, you didn't build anything, but maybe your team went out and won, and now you have built something socially tangible. So that's sort of my input on the difference there.
Yeah, and I think it brings up just what do you value? To each individual, what is valuable to them? If you only care about creating material things or gathering material things, it may not be valuable. But if you value experiences and interaction with other people, or even just an artistic experience, I don't see any way that it's technically less valuable, especially as technology increases and, you maybe will be able to smell and feel the feeling of a room and have it be even more realistic. So
the social aspect is obviously pretty intriguing, and that's where a lot of the focus is for me in some instances. But there are definitely other aspects. One of the things, Alex, that you had said to me when we were sort of pre-planning this episode was this analogy of, like, if you think about the use of a documentary film, the whole point is it's trying to make a case. It's trying to tell you that something is important, or that, a certain thing is worth thinking about in a different way. It's trying to inform you in a way that gets you to think it matters. Well, I think analogously, video games can have a benefit of, beyond the social skill building, of other skills, things like puzzle solving skills, resource management skills, learning history, and things like that. And even if in form they're not as surface level oriented toward that as a goal, I think in practice it does help that. So what are some of the other types of skills or things that you feel like you've maybe learned or gleaned from your experience playing video games?
I think one of my main, weaknesses is that I am incredibly impatient. And you actually already know this about me. But I hate waiting for people. I hate when people are late. It drives me absolutely crazy. And there is just maybe not just waiting around, but decision making. There is a time, not just the function of what your decision is. When did you make that decision? Did you make it in time? Were you too hasty, as I said before? And I think, again, being presented with enough situations, maybe kind of knowing, okay, I need to think about this for a little bit longer before I jump into something. And I think when the consequences aren't so great, because again, we're talking about video games, when at the end of the day, if I made a mistake that was too hasty, at the end of the day, I'm still sitting in this chair, we're still, yeah. I'm alive, I think that thinking of looking at failure a different way, and you always hear professional athletes talk about how failure is an opportunity, and you've heard it said a million different ways by athletes from every sport, and you hear it from politicians, and everyone always talks about it. But it is such an easy and simple way to look at failure, because if you spend enough time in a virtual world, you will make mistakes doing what you want to do. But those mistakes don't have consequences other than you lose something that is not really tangible, unless you've paid real money for it, which is now possible. And I think that kind of helps just conceptually to apply to, why didn't I do this, and why didn't I take my time on this, or this entire situation wouldn't have been here if I had just, reacted a little bit faster. So I think that just aside from social interaction, just from a problem solving point of view, and everything in a video game you can think of as problem solving. You're always trying to do something, right? Maybe you're not solving a jigsaw puzzle, but you're always trying to get through something in some way. And if it had no challenge, or if it had nothing to do, people wouldn't play it. There would be no sense of accomplishment. And I think that we see it in the video game industry all the time, is people will develop something and put it out, and then at the end, we're all sitting here going, I didn't do anything. This didn't make me feel or think or do anything. And I think that there is a huge benefit just to that aspect of video games as well.
I always make the claim that I learned more playing video games than I did in K through 12 education. I don't know if there's a accurate way to evaluate that, but I definitely remember more of what I learned from them than I did in school because they sparked a curiosity in me. So when I was playing strategy games set in Europe in the Middle Ages, I remembered all of the capitals of European countries. I know where all the countries are. I know how the countries changed over time. And I was invested in it because I was taking part in it. So I feel like that translated to me wanting to learn more outside of the game too. So learning about medieval history, learning about different parts of the world, different cultures. And I don't know if I just never got that in school. There was never an interaction that I had with the material that I was learning that to me was interesting enough for me to want to learn more beyond what was being presented to me. So I get similar things from movies, or other art forms, less from art for me, but from music, from TV shows. So I categorize it in with that, kind of art, or I'm not sure exactly how to classify it, but it gives me a starting point for another way to interact or learn about the world.
I think that media, like not to put a word in your mouth for what to call it, but they call music and they call art. They call music and they call visual art, paintings. They call them both art of sorts. But if someone, I play music, and when someone's like, "Oh, you're an artist," the first thing that pops into my head is, "No, I'm not. I play the mandolin." It's not. It doesn't stick to me like that. And I think that movies and video games and music, they all kind of form this, media. It presents you with things that someone else came up with. And the main difference between video games and those other more passive forms of media is that you are engaged. You don't get to see the end of the game unless you get there. Now, how hard is that is completely dependent upon what you're doing in the first place. But there is this little holdback, so it does require some input from somebody. And
I think from a like an artistic perspective, that's almost more powerful, or has the potential to be more powerful than sort of static media or non-interactive media, because in order to get the payoff, in order to see the end of the story, so to speak, you have to invest something in it. If you're reading a book, like, you can call literature art, and I would absolutely call it art, but the only thing you need to invest to get to the end of a book is the time to read all the pages. But if you want to get to the end of the story of a game, you need to put in more effort than just letting it happen to you. You need to pay attention. You basically need to invest attention. That's the thing. And I think that has the potential to be something where people can get a more powerful payoff when they do reach the end.
Yeah, and I always think of games like Nier, or those stories where there are multiple endings, and even the Resident Evil games, in the early days, they were having 4, 5, 6 endings at the end of the game, and it reminds me of those books where it says, if you think the character should make this decision, turn to this page, and if you think they should make this other decision, turn to this page, and you're just kind of deciding what to do. And in those books, you can look at that page and then say, "Oh man, I don't like that. I'm going back and I'm changing my mind." But you might be stuck with the decision that you make. And I think that that's been used in a way in video games that is really engaging. And
yeah.
As far as the game itself, from that media point of view, it's useful because someone can make a story with multiple endings and multiple branching paths, and it makes people like that game. If they did like it, they're going to invest more time in it and do it again, maybe a little different this time. And you don't really see that in movies as much, but I think that there are some unique storytelling things that can be done in video games. And I think some great stories have been told in the past, and there are even some games that came out in the last year where they are as engaging as movies. You're watching these cutscenes, and it's between things that you actually did, but you're paying attention and you're engaged the same way, almost exactly the same way that you would be if you were watching a movie.
Yeah, I did want to put in my input for the question of sort of the skill building type of thing. I think I'm actually going to mirror your point, Alex, about how you said you learned more in video games than you did through kindergarten through 12th grade. I would make a similar claim, but I think I would compartmentalize it and say that for certain types of knowledge, I learned more from video games. Like, I learned more about orbital mechanics and space flight and things of that nature, and basically like the physics of the cosmos. I learned more of that from playing Kerbal Space Program than I did from science class. I learned more about the physics of airplanes and helicopters through playing DCS World and ARMA than I did in any of my classes where we covered that stuff. And granted, I didn't formally study things like aerospace engineering or things like that. But I think for the average person who wants a good understanding of some topic they're interested in, certain types of games absolutely are much more engaging, much more maybe salient or absorbable, and do a better job of teaching things than a lot of formal education does.
And I think just the hours spent in it are sometimes much greater. Like I used the example of geography. I've played that game in medieval history for, I don't know, over probably 200 hours. And I've never sat in a geography class for 200 plus hours. Right. So, maybe I shouldn't be too presumptive to, make the claim that it inherently has more value. But I never felt like I was part of it in school, And
also the other thing that I think is important to remember when we're talking about the interest of people is, if you try to get people to do things, even if they do it, they might not really want to, and I think that you being there and being interested is what makes you better at the skills needed maybe just to play the game. And like for you, like, does it help you in your day-to-day life that where these different towns were in medieval Europe or anything about any of those systems in that game? Maybe not, but as far as something like history or like geography, things that are at least sort of applicable in a school term sense, at least at that level, your interest in the video game helped you to learn something, right? And I think that there is, as far as like for the future of video games, I think that there are going to be some things that are developed that are really beneficial for learning. There have been lots of studies on learning and how children learn and how best to make them learn and how do we get them to absorb as much information as possible and how do we make our children smart so they can go on and be successful. And I think if you're interested, you learn better. And
I did a an essay in college. We had a class. Alex and I actually took this class together. It was, I think it was the history of narcotics, and it was all about the history of narcotics. And our final paper was, we were supposed to sort of look at our own lives and look at something that we maybe treated the same way that we saw these people throughout history treat various narcotics and drugs of all sorts. And my topic was video games, because a lot of people talk about video game addiction and how, it's got all these negative effects. But the reason I brought it up, Nate, was because you were talking about sort of the future of video games and the sort of education potential. There's actually some research shown that video games specifically meant to educate people don't help. Like those little kid sort of leapfrog games where it's a game to try to help you learn math, don't help. And if I could venture a guess as to why, I think it's because the higher order goal is not there. And I think when we talk about the skills that we've built learning games, it's because we were motivated to learn those skills for a higher order goal. Like for me, learning orbital mechanics was because I wanted to successfully, complete whatever task in Kerbal Space Program. And for Alex, learning geography, it wasn't because he wanted to play a game to specifically memorize the capitals of these cities, because, there was some higher order goal in the game to like take over towns and whatever. And learning the skill or learning the knowledge that you would typically learn in the classroom was just a necessary prerequisite for achieving that goal. So I think there's that important distinction when we talk about games as education.
Yeah, and I think that it's easy to learn things haphazardly. You're interested, like I don't even know what game Alex is talking about. It sounds like some sort of real-time strategy game. And the only real skill we've talked about is geography. And I know it wasn't a capital naming game. He was just happened to have learned that because it was easier for him to do other things because of that. And I think that with a lot of those games, and I did play them, I specifically remember playing strange little games that were meant to teach me math on old computers when I was young. And in school, there was a computer lab that was just like a math lab, and it was a cartoonish rabbit-based adding game or subtracting at that level. The goal wasn't there. There was no higher reason to be there, because the higher reason in that game is exactly the same as the reason that teacher is up there teaching to children in the first place. It's to learn the material. And I'm not sure that it's really been figured out how to best take things that might be mundane or not seemingly applicable to children and getting them to learn it early enough so that they're processing higher functions with things that we see as simple, like addition and subtraction. How do you reward that in a video game in a way that makes kids want to learn math?
Yeah. So I think that sort of leads into one of the other interesting things to discuss, which we sort of briefly touched on earlier, but I'm curious to ask you two specifically, and maybe Nate, you can go first. Why do you play video games?
I guess one of the important distinctions for me is, as I said before, I never cared how useful it was. Personally, I don't watch much television, so I probably spend about as much time as your average person spends watching television playing video games. It is my media consumption of choice, and I do it for a bunch of different reasons. But like I said, my earliest memories are of playing Street Fighter, and I'm sure that the only reason I did that is because I was handed a controller and like kind of told what to do. So my introduction was not, there wasn't really a why, at least from my point of view now. I did it because I was told to at the time. I would say that there is a bigger, at least, admission by a lot of people that it is escapism. Maybe not necessarily for bad things, but again, as a form of relaxation. Games like Stardew Valley are very, very almost cathartic to sit there and you're growing crops and you're doing all these really mundane sort of things to someone who's watching you. You know, they're saying, are you farming in what looks like a 16-bit world almost? But I think that sort of relaxation is can be akin to someone just kind of sitting down, or maybe someone's having a drink, or I think it can just be a way to relax. And I don't think I went into it with looking to be better at social interaction. I certainly didn't join a video game clan years ago to heighten my ability of communication. I just wanted somebody to play with. But I think my main reason is just really relaxation personally. And I know that some people are out there to be like the best competitive Rocket League player, or even as far back as, you know, the original Donkey Kong or the Pac-Man, there was a competitive nature. So I think a lot of people are into that as well. I want to be better than everyone, or I want to at least improve myself in a way that shows that I'm doing something. And again, that's back to the whole, how do games make us feel achievement? And I think that even when you are relaxing in something that maybe might not be so intense, you're still achieving something. So I guess there's a lot of reasons overall why I do it. And I play such a strange variety of competitive and relaxing and RPG and puzzle games that I couldn't really nail it down on any one point, but on any given day, I could probably say, yeah, today I need to go be the best at car soccer.
Alex?
Yeah, I'd parallel a lot of what Nate said. I feel like because they're so immersive, and I primarily play single player games, but I think this applies to any type of game. You almost get into like a flow state that you hear people talk about, you know, as if they're competing in sports or they're really working in their discipline that they're experts in. You're so focused on what you're doing that other problems don't really manifest themselves in your mind. You just kind of forget about them because you're focused so much on the task at hand, whatever that is. And I think that, you know, that is kind of an escapism, but I feel like a lot of entertainment and even social stuff, any type of things we do, are trying to get our minds to a different state than they're already in. You know, even just going for a walk, going to the gym, that's all, at least partially, has the goal of altering what our mind is doing at that current moment.
Yeah, altering some sort of some aspect of your current conscious experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was talking to a friend the other day, and before I give my reasons, I think this is an interesting story. I was talking to a friend the other day. I won't name him, but he had asked me to download a mobile game that was the mobile version of a game that I've played with friends before. So he wanted me to download this game on my phone, and my first instinct was to say no. I have no interest in doing that, but it took me a second to realize why. And I think the reason that I understood why my own motivation was to not download that game has to do with what I understood about his motivations for playing it. When I typically see mobile games like this, they seem to be purely oriented toward alleviating boredom. And in one of our previous episodes, or our first episode, we talked about boredom and some of the benefits and the reasons it's worthwhile to pay attention to. And I think that, to me, that's such a detriment psychologically to reach for something like a video game, specifically because the suffering of boredom is so intolerable and you don't know what else to do. I think that leads to a bad habit. So my motivation for games aside, there are certain times where I will actively choose not to play video games, and usually that's when I'm bored. I think that helps me keep a healthy relationship with video games, is making sure that they don't become a way for me to just not be bored. But feel free to jump in on that if you want. But real quickly, my motivation for playing video games, I think it has to do with some of the things we talked about already. In some cases, it actually is because I'm a weirdo, a little bit educational. Like with DCS World, I'm there to learn about the systems of the aircraft. I'm there to understand the mechanics of how the aircraft works, understand, the parameters for aircraft weapon delivery. That's just because I'm that interested in that from a technical perspective. Other times I'm there because I want to achieve that flow state. I want to get in that state of task-oriented communication, teamwork, and I'm there because it feels good to be part of something accomplishing a goal. And I justify that with the secondary effects, but primarily I'm there because it has a positive mental benefit to put yourself in that flow state.
Yeah, and I think almost to another point that we kind of keep bringing up, and I don't want to hijack the direction of where this is going, but we have brought up a lot of negative things about video games in general. And I feel like I can, at least in my opinion, like speak to that, because I have had definitely a lot of situations since I've been playing, which has almost been my whole life, where I should have been doing something else. Maybe not because I had work to do or anything, but because it wasn't a good use of my time, or maybe there was some other negative aspect to it. And, we talked about escapism, and we kind of talked about it in like this good light as a useful tool. Maybe escapism is needed, but maybe you should be doing something else. And I always have that feeling, as I think many people, even people who watch television, I think there is a lot of guilt about, I should be doing something else. I should be doing this, or, I certainly shouldn't be playing video games, or watching television. And I think that especially for young people, you can kind of get into that flow, and you say the flow is kind of good. It's pleasing, and that's why I could sit down as a teenager and, it's Saturday and I don't have anything to do. I don't have any sports. My parents aren't making me work. I'm going to sit here for 8 hours straight. And I'm going to only get up to eat and go to the bathroom, and I'm going to play. And like that can have negative effects, certainly. And I've been there multiple times. But I also think that there has been a benefit to that bad part of it, like especially if you can see it. We always make the joke about, it's almost a trope at this point, the fat, sweaty person living in their parents' basement, or, someone's been playing World of Warcraft for 13 years straight, and doesn't have a job. That's kind of overblown. You see it on television, but like there are people who are susceptible to that sort of behavior. And I think it's so easy. And we had similar problems with the concept of violence in the 90s and early 2000s when I was a kid. And, people wanted to blame the video games because the video games were violent. And, you know, on one hand, tons of people played the violent video games, and the argument was, well, how come everyone isn't, you know, partaking in this violent issue that is being blamed? But it is kind of shown that if you have a predisposition for addiction, maybe video games will be that thing for you, you know, just like gambling might have been that thing for you. And I mean, let's be real. We talk about the sense of achievement. Video games light up your brain. They light it up in a way that you know, drugs of different sorts and alcohol and you know, just sort of mental stimulation like that is addicting. And you can be partaking in escapism in one way in video games the same way someone might be partaking in drugs for escapism or you know, loneliness. You know, I'm here, I'm by myself, everything is the same, but I'm not thinking about it because I'm so focused on this objective, which again, fundamentally in meat space doesn't matter, right? And if we get too wrapped up in that we're not focusing on, you know, what should I be doing? Should I be doing anything? Have I done anything in the last 8 hours? You know, and I wish I had time even today. I still have those thoughts. Like those were happy memories for me at some times. Like I enjoyed those Sundays or Saturdays where I would be alone and be able to do that. But I think you can get stuck in this loop of, okay, I'm out of work. I'm going to go home. I'm going to sit down in front of my PlayStation and I'm going to play until the latest point in time that I can possibly stay up. And then I'm going to go to sleep so I can get up and go to work. And it sounds absolutely crazy, but there are people who live their lives like that. And I think it can cause problems that aren't even really predictable from your point of view while you're doing that. Like, you know, you can kind of feel like alone, even though like you're sitting, because you're not having real human interactions. They're real in the sense that we are talking to each other, but there is an advantage to physically being in a room with someone and interacting with them. And you don't get that with video games.
I think by the nature of the medium as well, there are certain psychological traits that just the mechanics of video games can exacerbate. Like I remember as a kid playing games where I'd get stuck on some task, some level somewhere, and I would just get so frustrated. And like for me, there was a certain frustration reaction I would get from games that I don't ever remember getting from anywhere else. And we've all seen those viral videos online of the kid who, you know, gets frustrated at the game, you know, jumps up from the computer and snaps the keyboard in half and, you know, rams his head into the wall and puts a hole in the wall. Like we've seen that. Is there, I think one of the negative side effects to, you know, gaming as a whole, and it depends, of course, on the person and the game and how they're playing, why they're playing. But one of the negative side effects we can see is these outbursts of anger that potentially translate into the real world, into the meat space realm.
Yeah, just a story that happened to me with one game. I almost never get angry. But there was this game, I was probably in 6th grade, and it was like a card game. It was tied into an RPG that I was playing, but it was like blackjack or something. And I just couldn't win, and I couldn't stop playing. And I got so upset. I was like screaming and like ready to like throw stuff. And I don't know if I had been like that since I was like 4, you know? But that brought that out in me. And finally, once I was able to quit it, I was like, okay, that is not the thing for me to be playing. So I wonder why it is that brought me in. I mean, it was basically gambling, right? Luckily for me, there were no stakes other than my time and energy. But at least I learned that I shouldn't gamble.
And I think there are people who will not learn that. I mean, I have seen people spend money on mobile games or keys for boxes, or it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what it is. I mean, I'm not saying that, that anything is or isn't gambling necessary, but like, if there's a potential for something to be abused, a human will do it. And there are so many different types of people. I think that you're just bound to find extreme cases across the board with everybody. And the way that our media, our news, the stories that do go viral, they are the ones that we see. We see that crazy kid whose mom took his subscription and he was freaking out and screaming like you probably haven't seen a real person do in front of you. And how much of that is real rage in any given instance, and how much of it is set up is, for everyone to determine on their own, I guess. But
or how much of it is, actual psychological outliers in society having freakouts that are within what they normally would do, or how much of it is unlocking a part of our psychology that most of us have that just, that kind of rage just never comes out except under those circumstances.
Yeah. And I think if you've, do you know that you have a tendency to snap? Is that you?
Me?
Alex, you said before, I don't get angry. Well, do you though?
Yeah.
Is there a foreseeable way to make you snap? Is something as simple as online blackjack? Does that set you off because of what it is, or does it set you off because of your investment in it and being traced back to you again?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I can say I've since then freaked out maybe twice. So it's not something that happens often, and it's never happened in that severity. So I'm going to put some of the onus on the game itself, honestly.
I just want to say, I've known Alex for, 6 years now? I've never seen you freak out.
Yeah.
Like, I've seen you have some negative emotional states, but the way that you just described, I've never seen that.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I get anxiety, I get stressed, but I don't yell and scream and throw stuff.
So I think this is sort of the final question that I want to pitch. And I want to start with bringing back something that you said, Nate, about problem solving, and that video games at their core are problem solving, whatever video game you're playing. In my mind, there's a hierarchy there of which problems are worth solving. Like Tetris on a phone while you're bored, riding the bus. To me, that's a problem that's not worth solving in that way. But in other problems are hierarchically more worth solving than that, like the games that I do play. But my question, having said that, is, are video games a good use of your time? Are they worth it?
I think that I think that my real issue is there's no clear answer to that. When I got home from work today, I should have mowed the lawn. Did I instead do something else? Then in that small space in my life, was it a waste of time? Yes, in that case, it's tangible. It makes sense. But if you look back on, say, the last 4 years of me playing any particular game. If you add up all the time, Steam is constantly showing you this little number, and it shows how much you play in over 2 weeks. And sometimes if you play a lot of video games, that number can really startle you. No one sends you a report every month and says, hey, you watch this much TV. Although if you get through an entire season of a Netflix show in a day, there might be something there. But, I think that as a medium, because they are engaging and attention kind of important, you need to pay attention. You have to do these things to get through, to experience more of it. I think that you can spend a lot more time, more actively engaged in this thing that, again, doesn't help anyone outside of you sitting down and experiencing it. But I feel like if we're saying that, it's okay to never to, not always be working, if it's okay to never be functionally getting something tangible done, then I feel like video games are a good use of my time. And if I didn't engage in that, there are things I wouldn't have learned, applicable things that I've used in my life that I never would have experienced, people I never would have met. And I think that it can be gone about in a way that is beneficial to anyone. And there are so many ways to go about playing video games and engaging in the medium that I think everyone has a way in which they can benefit from video games in general.
Yeah, for me, I'd say it depends on just my priorities. If it lines up with what my goals are, then, and I enjoy it and I'm not frustrated and it's something that I enjoy doing, then it's not a waste. It's not, it's valuable. One of my gamer friends always mentioned the quote, "Time you enjoyed wasting was not wasted." So if you value just your ongoing conscious happiness and you enjoy video games and it doesn't negatively impact your life otherwise, then I think it's a good enough use of your time and you might just learn something.
I definitely struggle with this question because at my core, I'm not a hedonist. My hierarchy of value in life does not have conscious pleasure at the top. But, my conscious well-being is up there. And, the other deeper meanings for me, things like being virtuous, are more important than pleasure. So for me to justify playing video games, I think they have to be games that I'm not playing specifically for pleasure, that I'm playing for meaning. And sometimes that meaning is pleasurable, like I was saying with the flow state and, being able to put my brain in that state. And I guess, I don't know, it's a question I struggle with because I think sometimes I do play games for pleasure and I don't know if that's a good use of my time. But I think in comparison to a lot of things that other people do, or that maybe not other people, but just in general that people do, there are things I could be doing that are much more destructive. I could be spending all my time on Facebook, looking at how much I wish my life was like other people's or something. I could be gossiping. I could be out going to bars, binge drinking. There are much more destructive things to do. That's not to say that everything else is more destructive. I could be being more productive, but I guess my answer to the question, are video games a good use of your time, is I don't know.
I would pitch to you the idea of just that your mind may need that balance. I don't know if I don't actually know, but I don't know if the human mind can be committed and think about being virtuous all the time. So if you kind of let that go to do something that you at least know is not harmful, like play a game, that may be a beneficial break for your mind. And I think sometimes in my experience, I've been a lot happier, which has then lended itself to being more productive and virtuous and other positive things if I'm more accepting of my behaviors. So if I accept that I need to play games every once in a while, or I need to have a few drinks, or have to sleep in, or do all these things that may not be ideal on paper, if I just accept that I do them, the level of stress that reduces and the peace it brings me frees my mind up to then do all the other things that are, on paper important.
I think it's important to keep that in perspective. Like I said, I personally have a intrinsic guilt about not doing certain things when I should be. And there's always something that I
motorcycle. Continue.
Yeah, I mean, I have almost, and I wouldn't call it overwhelming as in powerful, but it's always there. There is some sort of guilt when I'm not doing something that I should be doing. And if you live relatively, busily, you probably always have something on that list of things that you could be doing. I've struggled with it for a long time. I think it is important to, sit down and do something that is not, actively helping you to achieve some goal. And I think everybody finds a way to relax. I think that newer mediums kind of have more scrutiny as well. Like newer things are kind of scary. And even though we've had video games for, a long time at this point in time, multiple decades, and, they went mainstream, a decade after they kind of came about, but there have always been people of all ages who just see it as a waste of time. And I think that there will always be people like that. I don't think that everyone can have their mind switched about this.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And there are people who should not probably play any video games because they see it as a waste of time, or, they will always feel terrible, or they might get sucked in like we talked about before. But I think that there is a lot of, even still to this day, there is negativity amongst people of all ages about use of time. And it is a kind of thing where people have decided, I'm going to judge you openly for this use of your time. But no one has judged me for watching an entire season of Lost. No one ever has anything bad to say about how my mother watched every single episode of Survivor for 6 seasons in a row, Yeah. But the second I was playing Spyro the Dragon for more than 4 hours, even if I had nothing else to be doing, there were people around who would say, hey, you should probably stop doing that.
All right. Any closing thoughts on this topic?
I would just say a lot of people I know, still just touching on what we were just talking about, including me, have also had that issue with feeling guilty about playing them. And, I think that's just something that if you feel that way, just examine why you feel that way. Is it even you? Is it just culture and people have told you that? Do you not actually believe that? Do you just have a lot of cognitive dissonance around this? Do you believe two things at the same time? Do you think it is a useful use of your time and not? Why do you have this guilt around it? And if you can work through that, maybe you can come to a conclusion. Like one of you said, maybe you're somebody that just shouldn't play games. And if you come to that conclusion, then that's okay. Just maybe that will give you some closure. And if you realize that it can fit into your life and be helpful in the ways that we were talking about earlier in the podcast, then just accept that you're going to play sometimes. And when you decide on playing, just enjoy it. And then when you're done, be done and, let the cycle go on.
Well, with that, I want to transition to a segment we like to call the off topic. Nate, as our guest, you've been pre-briefed on this, but the off topic is your chance to basically pitch something to us that we can talk about for maybe 20 minutes or so. Could be an idea that influenced you in some way, a project you're working on, some music you're listening to, a charity you like, a hobby you have, something that somebody said to you in line at the grocery store, really anything. And we'll just sort of, spend some time on it. So, Nate, what do you have for us?
So I was trying to come up with something for a while, and something that I think about daily, and it is almost not off topic, is procrastination. And I suffered from it horribly when I was in school. Again, that likely had to do with my complete lack of interest and motivation, even after I had chosen my major in college and decided kind of what I wanted to do. I would still be finding myself doing anything in my power to not do the thing that I wanted to do. So I came up with some solutions for myself, and I'm not sure if someone has published these somewhere else. I'm sure they have. I probably read them from somewhere or heard them from someone else. But I kind of break my day up, whether I'm at work and I have 1,000 things to do, or I'm at home and there's a small list of things to do. I break my day up into these tiny, tiny segments of time. Most people think about their day at work in terms of half a day, or I have 2 breaks and lunch. So I have 4 quarters of my day, and then I can just break up what I do into that. Well, I like to break it a little bit further, and I kind of say, all these things I have to do, how much time are they going to take me? And everything that takes a short amount of time, I want to do immediately. And for me, that just helps me, I don't want to water the garden. Well, I know it takes less than 5 minutes for me to go out there and water the garden. So why don't I just go do it right now? And once that's out of the way, the next thing can bother you, if you let it, if you want to think of it that way. And I know that a lot of people probably want to get big things out of the way first, or maybe they do want to procrastinate. But I think it helped me a lot personally to just break up all of these tasks or things I should be doing, or it helped me to organize thoughts or even plan my trips. How long is it going to take me to buy my ticket to that festival? Okay, that's short. But doing an itinerary for the whole week, maybe I'll put that off a little bit longer. And Alex talked in, I believe it was episode 0, about meditation and the use of boredom. And I think procrastination is like a function of us being bored. It's not engaging to go do the things you don't want to do. There's a reason you don't want to do them. And I think kind of seeing, again, like boredom as something that's useful, maybe not to try not to be bored, but maybe to use that as something functional. Like it's mindless. This thing I have to do is so easy. I don't want to do it. I don't want to fold my laundry. I don't want to do the dishes. Those things are going to take me such a small amount of time, but putting them off only makes everything worse,
So I want to bring in some other thinkers here. While you were talking, I quickly jotted some notes. There are three different sort of philosophies that I've come across in the past year or two that all have very, very similar solutions to what you were just talking about. And I think that probably speaks to the efficacy of those solutions, that many people across different domains have come up with them. But specifically, Jocko Willink, retired U.S. Navy SEAL, does a podcast about leadership and specifically how the skills needed in combat leadership apply to the rest of life. Great podcast, can't recommend it enough. But he's got these two principles in part of his philosophy, if you can call it that. One is discipline equals freedom. The idea that if you have the discipline to execute the things that you need to execute, that actually gives you the freedom to, later on act in a way that's maybe more spontaneous or less risky. It helps you mitigate risk. The easy example is financial discipline, right? If you have the financial discipline not to spend money on stupid stuff, you have more money to spend on stupid stuff if you decide it's the right thing to do. So there's this aspect of discipline, like you were talking about watering the garden. Well, part of your solution to that was, well, I just need to go do it. The other part that's still from Jocko's philosophy is this idea of prioritize and execute. You list out the things you need to do in some order of priority. In your case, it's amount of time, but in some cases it might be importance or how hard things are. Whatever it is, you prioritize and you execute the first item on the list. And that's your focus, is just the one thing. And then you move on to the next one. And that kills two birds with one stone, because you're not only mitigating the instinct to procrastinate because you're only seeing one thing at a time, and you're time boxing so it feels manageable. You're also sort of getting rid of the impulse to be overwhelmed by tasks being too big. When you prioritize and execute, you break things down such that the example, this is the other thinker I want to bring in, who basically says the same thing in different words. Jordan Peterson talks about these complex tasks like clean your room. Well, clean your room is actually huge. And when you teach a child how to clean your room, you don't just sit them in the room and say, clean your room, and then wait for them to do it. You start with subtasks. You start with small things, and you can do this with yourself when you're procrastinating or have something important you need to do. You teach the child, well, you see the stuffed bear over there? Can you go put Mr. Bear on the shelf? And they put Mr. Bear on the shelf, and you tell them, good job. Then you do maybe one more thing. You say, hey, can you fold the blanket? And they, maybe they poorly fold it, but you tell them good job anyway because they did the task. And it's this little process of tiniest possible increment with some sort of reward. For a kid, or maybe even yourself, it's saying, hey, job well done. But it builds up to this bigger thing, which is clean your room. And eventually, with a kid, you can say, clean your room, and they understand that means, fold the blanket, put the stuffed bear on the shelf, and they'll figure out that all those subtasks are part of it. For yourself, when you're procrastinating on something big, it's getting yourself to understand sort of deeply psychologically that you have the ability to break down really complex, difficult tasks into things that you can manage. And the last thing is the Scrum framework for software development. In Scrum teams, they break down tasks into things. They say that, I forget what the exact number is, but when you have this list of tasks, if any task is estimated to take longer than something like 2 hours, break it down into smaller tasks. And that way, a project that's going to take you 5 years to complete is eventually broken down into 2-hour tasks that you can complete in manageable times. And you don't have these things that are, easy to procrastinate on. So that's what I thought of while you were talking.
Yeah, I wrote down some stuff too, and to kind of approach it from a different angle, how I view stuff because I've always had an issue with procrastination, and for the past couple of years it's been a lot better actually. So I always try to remember why I'm doing things. So let's say it's the dishes, well, I'm doing them so that I can eat, so that I can have clean dishes to eat. And I need to eat because I want to be alive, And if you put value into tasks, I think you're much more likely to do them. So if you can kind of reason a value from each thing you have to do and understand why it's important in the grand scheme of things, I think it will help with that. And the other thing is just remembering that most stuff you have to do doesn't suck, right? Like most things we do day to day we tend to categorize as neutral experiences. Like doing the dishes isn't bad, nothing wrong with it, It's not a horrible experience. It's not torture unless you mentally make it torture. So if you, like, a lot of my perceptions and things that I think are important come from somewhat of a Buddhist understanding of the world. And from that, if you pay attention to your experiences, you see them in a different way. So if you're washing the dishes, this is actually a classic Buddhist example where when you're doing the dishes, if you notice the warmth of the water on your hands and the task you're doing, the movement of your fingers, all of this stuff is something that your mind can focus on and learn from, or just not be suffering by understanding or paying attention to these things. So if you scale that back and realize that each task is just a bunch of these little experiences that you can notice different parts of, you can go into each new thing with an attitude of interest or curiosity. Like, what does this dried avocado feel like on my fingers when I'm cleaning the plate? How is it different from the crusty egg? So there's so much interest in everything around us that we just ignore. So if we try not to categorize tasks and put them into, I hate dishes, like why? Make it a different thing. Think about it. Try to notice a different part of it next time you do it. And if you can just push more and more of those experiences to be something that you can find an interest in, then, I think more of them will be easy to convince yourself to do. Because I've tried a lot of the stuff like Chase was talking about, and I need to think about it on a different level for it to be effective for me. Because I can plan every task down to subtasks and have my whole day laid out, but it just always gets messed up for me, or I don't value the system of it. So I really need to think about it a different way. I guess it's a less analytical way and more of an experiential way. But I think if people can try different of these methods, what Chase was talking about, what you were talking about, Nate, just find out why you don't want to do these things and then find a way to, change your idea about it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, any other thoughts, Nate, on procrastination?
Not really. I hadn't actually thought of it as a way of, in the way that Alex is talking about. I mean, I never thought about crusty egg on a plate specifically, but I also never thought about, I guess experiencing what you might consider to be a mundane task. And again, the whole concept here is we're not talking about going and we're not talking about going camping. We're not talking about going and playing a sport or going out for a drink. We're talking about these mundane tasks. We don't procrastinate when it's time to go have fun. Basically, yeah. We procrastinate on the work we have to do. We call it work. It's an activity just the same as going going for a run, which you might enjoy. It's still, you're doing something, but we don't consider it to be fun. And I guess kind of even trying to appreciate whatever actual experience there is there might be beneficial as well. I had actually not thought of that.
Wow. All right. A little switch happening right here.
That's right. I have switched, everybody. I'm switched.
Well, Nate, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Yes, thank you.
That was a very interesting discussion. I got a lot out of it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I know I'm not sure how much of a public presence you have on social media, but if people want to find you, I mean, maybe they just can't and, they're SOL, but is there any like social media, anything you would want to put out there? Maybe you could promote your band if you want.
I am a ghost. No,
Okay.
no, I'm not a ghost. I play in a bluegrass band. We're called Molly and the Badly Bent Bluegrass Boys. We have a couple of smaller bluegrass festivals. We're playing in upstate New York this year. You can find us on all kinds of social media. I believe we have a Facebook and an Instagram, and I'm not in charge of those things, but we are there. You can check us out. And other than that, I don't really spend that much time on social media. I try. That's one of my other weaknesses. I have to avoid it.
And what was the band name
enough.
again?
We're Molly and the Badly Bent Bluegrass Boys.
Can you spell that, please?
Do you have a while?
All right. Thanks, Nate.
Thanks, guys.